Okay, there, thank you very much for coming in today. So we're going to talk a little bit about types of assessment.
Okay.
Okay, so there are a variety of different types of assessment. Can you tell us a little bit about what those types are?
Well, as you said, there are many different types of assessment. We'll talk about four today. The initial assessment, the diagnostic, formative and summative assessments. And these are probably the four major ones that most teachers would use when getting students ready for exam, getting students ready for courses, and at the end of courses and during the course as well.
Okay, so if we just have a quick example of each one. So initial assessment, that would generally happen, I guess, as the name suggests, somewhere towards the beginning of the student's course.
Yes, that usually happens at the beginning, and that's used to place students. So sometimes it is called a placement test, and a student will come to a school, they'll be given an initial assessment which will normally cover the four different skills. Sometimes it is just grammar, but very often it covers the four skills, and then they're placed according to the initial assessment in the right class.
Okay, so it's initial assessment and diagnostic assessment.
This would normally be done by the teacher. So once the students have been assessed and placed into their classes, they would then do a diagnostic assessment where the teacher would be looking at specific sub-skills that maybe the students are struggling with or need help with, or might even be very, very good at as well. And the diagnostic assessment is really to give the teacher an insight into what their students are like.
Okay, and then we also have formative assessment.
And this is done during the course. So it could be done very informally, like through just questions, it could be like little mini tests, but it's done throughout the course at various different stages. I mean, most people would do this in every single lesson, some sort of formative assessment.
Okay, and there's also summative assessment normally at the end of a course.
That's right. So this might be what the students are working towards, a specific exam which they want to take, and this tends to be quite formal, unlike the formative assessment. So it might be an exam, it might be they have to put a portfolio together, something of those kind of.
Okay, and briefly, can we just talk a little bit about assessment of learning and assessment for learning? These terms are often linked to these different types.
Yes, so very often the summative assessment is assessment of learning. So it's checking
assessment of learning.
That's right. So it's checking that the students have learned what they should have learned. So this would be, as I said, at the end of the course. It could be the final exam. And the assessment for learning, on the other hand, would be during the course, and this would be like the formative assessment. And this is a way of actually identifying areas that the students might be struggling with, and it may be areas that the teacher might need to reteach again because perhaps they didn't teach it as well as they could have.
Well, the students need a second go at it or something like this.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, good. Thanks. Let's go back to initial assessment and unpack that in a bit more detail. So you said that normally happens or is used to roughly place students and is sometimes called a placement test.
That's right.
Can you give me a couple of examples of what might happen with this?
Well, sometimes this can double up as a diagnostic assessment as well. And for example, in colleges, many colleges have a computer assessment, initial assessment, and what happens is that students will come in, they'll sit down, they'll do an online initial assessment. This will generate a report which will go to the teacher, and the report can be used for diagnostic purposes. It can be used as a way to see if students are suitable for the course. It could be to see maybe which level they should go in at. It just depends on what the initial assessment is for.
Okay, and I guess different types of courses will have different types of initial assessment. So you mentioned going in at a certain level. So for, let's say, a language course, then it'll be, if it's like B1 or B2, roughly tuned to that kind of level. I guess for something like a teacher training course, an interview would probably be more appropriate.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there might be a grammar test as well for an initial teacher training course and an interview as well. But then there are also courses where there might not be an initial assessment, any initial assessment. So, for example, that might be when, say, somebody's applying for a course and it's the previous qualifications that matter. And if you don't have those if you don't have the required qualifications, you can't go on this course.
So a university course might be an example, a bit like that, exactly. An undergraduate university, let's say. So in an ideal situation, the teacher would get the initial assessment data and that would help support them with the students in their class. They'd have an idea about the strengths and weaknesses. But I guess that doesn't always happen. But can you tell me a little bit more about a diagnostic assessment, its purpose and how it's often implemented?
It could be an institutional diagnostic assessment where every teacher is given a diagnostic assessment which they use for their particular students. Alternatively, it could be the teacher's own diagnostic assessment. So, for example, I would have various different diagnostic assessments depending on the levels that I would use for my classes. There would be something to assess their knowledge of grammar, something to see what their reading skills were like, their writing skills, and very often I would do an activity. So this was quite informal, where students would have to speak. So it wouldn't actually be a speaking test, but it would be like they'd do like mini presentations, like group presentations, and that would give you an indication of even not just their speaking skills, but even levels of confidence.
Okay, so ideally this would happen early on when a student came into a class, but I suppose a teacher can just continually diagnostically assessing their students.
Absolutely.
And it's building up to the idea of an overall class profile, and they're getting just more information about what the students' strengths and weaknesses are.
Yes, and I think, as you said, it is very often done at the beginning of the course, just to see what the teacher might want to focus on during the course, and what when some students might need help with certain things. But it is a good idea, as you said, to do it throughout the course.
Okay, good, thank you. So that's our diagnostic. You mentioned formative assessment as well.
Yes.
There are a variety of ways we can formatively assess learners. Why do we do that?
Well, it's to check that learners are keeping up, and also to check that, maybe you're not, as a teacher, you want to make sure that you are presenting language clearly, learners have understood it. Sometimes, you think because students have, one or two students have got it, the whole class have. So by doing formative assessment, you get a much better indication of how all the students in your class are doing. And with formative assessment, it can be done in so many different ways. Through just simple Q&A, it can be done through sort of mini quizzes, even homework is a form of formative assessment.
I suppose monitoring as well is another one, quite a common one, of just listening to how students are doing.
Absolutely.
As you go around the class.
Yeah, and you can be taking notes, making a note of what sort of areas they're having difficulty with, what sort of common mistakes they're making.
So really any type of assessment in the class which informs the teaching of the teacher, or what the teacher needs to focus on, be it in that class in review or in the following class.
Exactly.
Okay, good. We also talked a little bit about summative assessment, and you suggested that was an end of course assessment. Tell me a little bit more about the purpose and some examples for that.
Well, very often students, take a course because they want to do an exam. So, for example, say they were doing the ISC exams, they would be in class preparing, maybe doing practice exams, reading and writing, maybe doing practice speaking exams, and then the idea would be that at the end of their course they would take a formal exam. This would be the summative assessment, and this would be done sometimes in their own school, sometimes they may have to go somewhere else to do the exam. They very often, if there's a speaking element, an examiner is brought in. Not always, but very often, for example, with the ISC and the GESE exams, they are brought in, and they would have a formal interview. And then there's very often a formal writing paper that they need to do. Other exams might involve us putting a portfolio together.
And in, as you say, in many or most of these cases, the summative assessment is assessed externally because it's probably certified, I guess, and you would need to have some quality assurance that the level of work being produced in that exam, that interview, that portfolio is of a similar level for as other places that are doing the same kind of exam.
Exactly, yes.
All right, good. Yvonne, thank you very much for your comments.
You're very welcome, thank you.